Hello, sir.
Hey there, Hazi. How are you?
How are you doing?
Um, yeah, I guess reasonable. It's hard to say always during this time. How are you?
Yeah, pretty crappy deal on the table with regards to the captives. I mean, obviously, I want them home, so that's great. The kids are home with their parents, and but as they say in Hebrew, lo pashut. It's not simple to. But this is not supposed to be simple. I guess it's silly to think that there would be like a simple outcome to such a thing.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, when you say it's a crappy deal, I mean, I'm not. I don't think we have too much disagreement, but I'm wondering what specifically, like, you would
well, first
point
off,
at.
I understand that they can't. We don't know. First of all, we don't know our numbers. Maybe they do. I don't. We don't know if it's the 240 or 250 they're talking about. We know where they all are. We know that they're all alive. So we don't know the numbers necessarily. We don't know who are all the actors that have them. And I understand again that like maybe the government can't talk about these things yet. So there's like a lot that's unclear. Second, the details of this deal. So like these 10 people for x amount of days of like like a pause. It just feels like it's a recipe to drag something out, which is not great. Um i i think it's, well, I'll get to that in the end. I also think there I mean, like, there's a sense where one of the deal is that the prisoners that we're releasing, they get to choose where they want to go. Like, the option is get the F out of here. That's the option. You're free to go, you leave and then leave the country. Like, I don't know why we're doing this deal of like, and you get back to go to, Judah, Samaria. And you can be like, well, that's where they live. The deal is like, you're getting free and you're welcome to go to any other country that wants to take you right now. But like, we're not releasing prisoners again into our populace when we've already been bitten by that in the past. So I think that's a little ridiculous. If anyone's watching, they should realize that like the leader of Hamas was deathly ill. We took care of him in Israeli hospital while he was threatening us that he's going to be eating our livers. So that's a little ridiculous. And lastly, which probably is like the most controversial, I'm not even saying that I'm right. I'm just saying like where I personally stand is, or well, I'm not even sure about it, is focusing on the like these deals are taking into consideration the individual, and a nation should be looking at the collective. And once you start doing deals like this, are we now turning the other 7 million people in Israel, are they captives in a certain sense, because we are now locked into this deal of these individuals? As horrible as that sounds, there's a part of me that would like this to be like a more cold calculation. But it could be that again, I'm not reading the map. It could be that like that's not an option, or who knows. But it just it just seems like not the greatest deal for us.
So, to me, it seems like there's an element of this deal and the whole situation that is, in a sense, inevitable. But going back to what we've been talking about a lot, I cannot put any trust, or I can put very little trust into the decision making. Now, you're talking about like the details of the deal, and I'm more focused on the details of what I don't know, in the sense that this whole situation is such that you have to put trust into the establishments that are responsible for this. Like, by definition, you will not be able to know everything that goes into such complex situation. and dilemma, right? Obviously, he talked about this also in a podcast, saying like that there are dilemmas that like solvable dilemmas versus unsolvable dilemmas, and the unsolvable ones. It doesn't mean that there's no progress to be made, or no better or worse choices. It means that even as you choose one horn of the dilemma, the other horn's validity does not waver, does not like the whether you choose to let's say sacrifice uh, some of the elements that are positive for us in keeping the terrorists in prison and not releasing them. um, there's that element, and there's the captives on the other hand, and like you're going to have to choose something, and the opposite choice does not then like disappear or become clear like what you should have done. It seems to me like the release of the captives, considering so many elements of how this has happened, and of Israeli society, uh, and everything that goes into that, in our own history with captives in other cases. Um,
We have better numbers now. I'm saying the ratio is better. Last time we did 1 for 1,000, right? So
yeah, and I think when you look at the deal for Gilad Shalit, it was very highly criticized. I think, I mean, also praised, but definitely across the board there was a lot of talk about like whether that's actually legitimate to even go there, like to negotiate in that manner, and what kind of precedent you're setting. I think, like you
this is
said,
also very different though, because that's a soldier. These are civilians.
exactly like that's what I was about to say, that situation was like a soldier, as painful as it is, like that's their job. They're supposed to defend civilians, right? And if and one of the things that could happen to you as a soldier is you could fall into enemy captivity.
Definitely, if you also fall asleep, right? It's not ideal than his scenario that like he was also like they screwed up as well.
Yeah, I don't know like every single detail of what happened, but yeah, it's clear that they had screwed up, right? Like, and but I don't know. I think soldiers, like anyone in any situation, but soldiers specifically, like you screw up a lot. That's a part of kind of being in that situation, and I don't know if I would like pin that on regarding the deeper and more like significant moral dilemma to go into that, right? Like even if it hadn't screwed up, the situation would be very similar. If he was the best soldier, like it wouldn't have mattered in the.
Yeah, I guess my point being that like in a certain sense, you're like, okay, A is a soldier. B, like he sort of made his own bed. But like you don't have that at all with what happened like in Gaza. There's no like this was always supposed to be avoided. And why you can say like we should always avoid soldiers getting kidnapped. The second you make him a soldier and put him on the border, then you're already creating conditions which are not ideal. Right.
Yeah.
So like obviously, this is a different sense, but I think on the leadership level, and forget the Gilad Shalit catastrophe, so to speak. Here, all these decisions would have been much better if after October 7th, Bibi said, "Listen, I'm not stepping down. However, after the war is over, either I'm having another elections and I'm not running." There should have been some sort of. It would have just made everyone feel that he's focused on the game and not focused on the politics. And there is a sense where like,
do you think he's focused on the game and not in the politics? I don't.
I'll tell you why I say yes. It's because I think the stakes are like incredibly high. And I could be wrong, of course. Ultimately, I think that like because I have faith in humanity, generally speaking, because I don't think Bibi should be the prime minister anymore. I don't think I want to believe that he wants to bring the babies home, the people home. Like, I know there's no way he's like, oh, this is fantastic. Like and maybe he's reached like next level, like Machiavellian of like, I'm going to let these two kids stay so I could do this. I don't know. I would think that as a prime minister, as a citizen of the Jewish people, the son of Ben Sion, the brother of Yoni, I want to believe the father of other children. I want to believe that is what's leading him. Now you have like your other safeguards, rather the fact that like, you have Benny Gantz over there, which you'd also think would be like, if he felt Bibi was just losing control or playing games, he would mention something, which let's say we saw a hint of that with like the coalition money that was going on right now. And
he caved pretty much immediately. He
so
just said, I will not cave to that. And then they said, oh, we're doing it. And then he said, okay, I'm caving in.
So I didn't dive deep into that yet. I read somewhere that like in the end, like it's somehow there was some sort of agreement that was like, yes, agreed by some people. But again, I haven't read into that too much. But to me, that's obviously none of those are good indications. Like we spoke a few weeks ago about like the fact that his son's name is being mentioned, big no. So here too, now to give the devil his due, right? Maybe it is too crazy to like, to not give I don't know. Maybe it's a mistake not releasing the coalition money. My point is,
but like there are so many elements, right? The fact that Ben Gvir and Smotrich are still in the government when right at the start of the war there was a proposition, for this unity government, and to replace them with people who have, by any standards, more proper skills for this emergency situation. That hasn't happened. There are government offices that are completely useless. They're not being closed. They're getting more money. All of these elements, like how am I supposed to, like, if you want to say I believe Azed is in the game, I want to see some evidence, and wherever I look.
Well, right? You could see the captives coming home. Is that like evidence that, or is that like, what do you need to see that you'd be like, oh, this is good?
What do I need to see to say
like
that this is good? What is the question? I'm like, there's a lot of things that are not good, but what are you asking me specifically?
I guess like you're saying like, we can't know where his priorities lie, so to speak. Let's say like Bibi,
yeah,
right? So how would you discern what is appropriate and what's not appropriate? Like as far as behavior goes. So like you could look at the 50 being released, being like, oh, good direction. You could be like, no, this shows that he's caving. Like this is bad. Like how do you decide to read like his actions if he's like, does that make any sense? Like, how are you discerning now based on
if I understand your question, you're asking how do I avoid confirmation bias, right? Like you're asking if I have pinned them as the bad guy, like how do I avoid now only selecting for the data that shows him to be the bad guy, right?
Right. Correct.
Well, I mean, we can go to the sort of deep philosophical question of how you avoid confirmation bias, which is important and everything, but like I said in the last time, I feel like there's a limit where sanity just comes into play. Like there's no reasonable way to justify putting a convicted felon as the minister of police, and certainly not one who was convicted of aiding terrorism. Like that just so like asking like, well, what would you need to see to make it seem that it was, the proper consideration? It can't be. Like there's a point where it can't. And then, okay, now the worst of our fears has come to pass. the minimum that you would like to see is like, okay, we have to get the most qualified people right now at these key positions, and not these dangerous and ill qualified people. And he has the ability to do that. It might cost him politically, but he can put other people there. The political constellations to do that exist. He's not working in that direction at all. So, I mean,
Well, no, I mean,
do
not
you still
not
think it's confirmation bias that I'm saying, like, just at the edges, at where I think, it's not about just seeing reality. It's just those extremes where we have to sort of be clear on like, that's outside the game. He's not even rectifying those. So
like, so I guess you would say that, like, the only way where you could say, where, let's say, Ben-Gvir stays, let's say if you heard Benny Gantz come and say right now, the government is too it's all too delicate right now. I'm saying, let's say he gave some answer like, it's too delicate to remove him right now, and like during the war, like, this is the cabinet that needs to stay. Like, if you heard Benny Gantz say that, would you feel then like, okay, then there must be some reason why they still need to have him on? Or would you be like, no, it's still like, there's no excuse? And by the way, like, I'm with you that he never should have been elected, and I think he's a buffoon. So like, I'm with you. I guess my question would be like when you look at Benny Gantz, right? Is that,
yeah.
do you feel in any way that he has his hand on the wheel, so to speak?
So there are two parts to that. One is, I generally don't trust him as much as the general, populace does. Like, I don't
Rightfully so. He's also involved in this debacle.
Yeah. So I don't feel like, so he's not from the Likud party, but except for that, right? He's not where I would put my my bets, right, on who can make this place better. And I think, right, that weighs into it. So the second thing that I'm not sure I understood, right, is, what would you mean, like, the government is too delicate, the situation is like there were just things, right? There are, in any democratic regime, in any like in the foundations of the regime, there are safeguards to enable the function of the state when extreme things happen, when the president of the United States dies in an assassination or in a plane crash. Like, there are safeguards for how the country continues to function. It can be done, right? You can say delicate, not delicate. That's exactly what I mean. The only considerations there are political, right? You're saying, like, oh, and Bibi said that, like, on October 8th, right? Like, when they were only talking about the united government, like, if I give up on Ben-Gvir and Smotrich now, what coalition will I have in 3 months? Because that's what's on his mind, right? How he stays in power.
Right. So that's a political statement, which has no place post October 7th.
Exactly. So again, every indication when we hear something come out of him that is not, let's say, completely engineered as propaganda, and I'm not saying propaganda necessarily in the negative sense, but like, that's a part of what happens at war and in peacetime, right? Everything we see from within the political sphere is just petty politics, the same that we had pre-October 7th, and like, I think even in some cases on steroids, right? Yeah. So like, that's how I see it. And seeing that, like, I really do not see any indication of remorse, any indication of accepting responsibility. I think, like, to be very very kind, like, to give a lot of credit that might be undue to Bibi, I think he, at the very least, sees himself as the only person who could have any sort of skills to do what is necessary for the people of Israel, whatever you could say, it's the effective power or whatever it might be, and he is still seeing the gain, right? The possibility that he will not be with his hands on the wheel is still the worst possibility for him.
Right? That's while there's a strong while there's a part of me that can't deny that that's like a pattern that's repeated itself. Given the personality, you could say, let's say, that's definitely there. I choose to believe that, like, in this kind of crisis, that's not the priority. However, I understand how you're saying, like, Chazi, for me to believe what you're saying, then I would need to see, like, get rid of Ben-Gvir, and I would feel like more comfortable. Or like I said earlier, if he would have said, after this is going to be elections and I'm not running again, right? You'd be like, okay, great. So like then I have a question. Let's say he said something like that. Let's say he said, I'm not running again afterwards. Would you feel more comfortable that Ben-Gvir is still there? Or would you feel like, no, it still needs to go? And by that, I'm saying, like, would that stress the point that, like, that's not being touched because, like, we don't want to play with something that, well, I guess he wouldn't have any reason not to do that at that point, because
yeah,
it's really
like,
as I'm
again,
saying,
it's just
so right. So
I mean, it's just like you're trying to build a sane world out of this insane, like a sane hypothetical situation, and
yeah.
No,
I'm with you. It's that's a stretch. I mean, to be honest, there's obviously a part of it that is, for my own sanity. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want to be walking around being like, we're fucked, basically, most of the time, because that's not the mindset I want to be in, right? So,
well, it's true, and I think like there's something. I think that there's something important, and it's hard, and it's not. I don't want to make this sound dogmatic, but I feel like it is sort of my duty to see reality as clearly as possible, and also not despair. You don't like not to avoid seeing what makes me more prone to despair, right? And I'm again, one of the reasons I'm talking to you, and I've mentioned this before, is because I want to see reality more clearly, and because I don't think that only speaking with my milieu of people is going to let me see reality as clearly as I should. And obviously, we disagree on a lot of things, and we're not going to see the same reality. But I hope that at least I feel that I am gaining something from this conversation, and I hope that you are as well.
Most definitely, and as the gap shrinks, or at the very least, as the gap gets more clear, right? So that obviously gives you more tools to at the very least know what kind of bridge you want to build, right? Because you got to sort of know what.
That's at least the goal that I see in conversations, just to find out what it is, where it is that we disagree. Right? Is more important and more difficult usually than immediately trying to solve it, because I think the mistake that people mostly make is they have just the wrong image of where the other person is, and then you're trying to build bridges where there are no problems and trying to create problems where there, so I do.
Well, in a certain sense, like, we after October 7th, we're waking up to a new Israel. I think we're still like very much in the thicket of October 7th. Like, I don't really see, like, the date hasn't changed yet in a certain way. Like, we're still in that very long day. And putting aside, let's say, economical differences we have, or let's say similarities that we have, I saw this like little interview with this member of Knesset from the Avodah, the Labor Party, and she was being interviewed, and she was saying how, like, the time, after the war, it's we're all ready to, to join forces with Meretz. And she mentioned Yair Golan being at the head, right? And you and I discussed how you saw this as like, you saw him as a
Potential hope.
A potential, leader, quality person, right? So I would say that would be like a new focus of, let's say, the disagreement, so to speak, where like, what happens after, because we all want we all want our soldiers home, and we don't want any soldiers dying, and like terrorists should be stopped, right? So there's a full agreement there. It is interesting to see if Israel is going to be more right wing after this. And by right wing, I'm not talking, again, not economically, right? So
yeah.
So the question is on twofold. How is that going to manifest with our...
What is more right-wing than this government?
Well, the question is the populace. It could be that the government itself... Well, first, it's before I talk about how the government looks, is do the people have a more right-wing sentiment, which would, let's say, articulate itself or manifest itself by saying, like, suddenly there's less... there's less openness to a two-state solution, or there's people having a like Bibi leaves, okay, and a Labor Party comes into power, okay, or Meretz comes into power, and then but yet the people want still more attacks on Hamas, right? You could like imagine a scenario like that where like which you've had in the past, let's say Rabin or other people that are still hawkish in a certain sense while still being left wing, right? So like, we don't know how that's going to play out necessarily. And I guess my while there's a sense where I feel like a little more, if there was a fear up until now saying like the left is being too liberal or too open with the sentiment of not of peace, but the sentiment of like who we have a partner, who our dance partner is. And you could say like, well, now everyone has sort of seen the light, so to speak. And like, so I could say on that end, I'm less nervous of someone making a deal which now threatens Israel even more, right? Now, obviously that could happen, but it would be like crazy if Yair Golan decided like the answer is no borders, right? You'd be like, I'm less fearful of that happening. I'm thinking what the ramification is going to be with regards to, let's say, the religious component. That's where like I see that's where I see the argument bubbling up again, sort of.
I mean, maybe we've talked about this in our first conversation, and I think still up to now, I think that the element that we should all agree and that would be better that we all agree on is just the removal of as many of the coercive elements that go into any of our religious affairs, right? And I mean,
but that might happen though. Like,
I'm just saying, I really don't see why, like, the let's say, I don't know, quote unquote compromise. I don't think it's a compromise. I think it would be just like, it's not a zero-sum game, so it would be just better for everyone that, that Tel Aviv and Hod HaSharon can stay liberal and secular cities, and Bnei Brak can rest assured that they won't have the gay pride parade going through their city, right? And they can live their lives the way they do. I think like I don't see why that's a contentious thing. And again, I think that a lot of, just to put it in perspective, right? I think that a lot of the animosity and the clashes that are happening are more generated for politics than real deep issues that are that are about like how we need to run the state. And some of it goes into, where the money goes, right? Who gets the monies, and this is where I think like a lot of the divide should be going, and things that we really need to discuss and decide as a state is what happens with the settlements. What do we want to do, right? The situation that we have in which we're committed to indecision is bad for everyone, and that's, I mean, I don't see how that contributes, and I think it's putting us at a stalemate. And I certainly agree with Leibowicz's statement that the day-to-day of holding civilian population under our military rule is something that corrupts our people, right? And I'm not saying I have like a fix-it solution, but the fact that we're just going on day to day, going like, that's fine, right? Like that there's no urgency in the government, in policy making, in everything that goes into that, to say like, this is really bad for us. We need to find a way to solve it. Now, if you're asking me, how do we solve it? I don't see like anything close to Smotrich's delusions on what can happen next. I don't think that millions of Arabs would be moved or deported, or all of those ideas. And I think any attempts, or even like discussing that, is putting Israel at in a worse position, both internationally and with our closer neighbors. So to me, like that's where my opinion lies, and maybe you would disagree with me that there needs to be a separation, in the sense that we need to decide who's a citizen in our country and who isn't. Now, you can call this another state, and you can call this an undefined territory, but like, there's a point where you need to say this is not a part of Israel, because if it is, then that is like both demographically, but also in the sense of just the people themselves, that we don't want living, all of them, in our midst.
Why?
Why don't we want all of the people of the West Bank living in our midst? Because of the level of animosity, right? Like, so to me, like, as Robin said,
but I want to just
there.
I want to just ask, though, and I'm assuming the answer is yes, but is it because, do you identify that the level of animosity is like, at least now, is on, like, you can't work with it? Or do you feel like, no?
I mean, what do you
like,
mean you can't work with it? So what do you mean you can't work with it? Like that's where the crux is. Like,
right. So
if you're saying that this will be the animosity for all time, then I mean, I
not
don't
all
have
time,
that.
but as far as I'm concerned, even 50 years is too long, right? Like, it's not something like it doesn't mean that, it means it's nothing that, like, it's too much to ask. Well, you could be like, no, a real leader would, but like, it's a lot to ask from leadership that, like, it's going to be past them, their kids, and their kids to make a decision that has to deal with, like, there's at least 50 years worth of animosity right now that you have to, like, sort of deal with. And
what conflict has been solved without that sort of foresight and forethought?
Well, no. So you could say that,
like, it's like the Talmud stories. You plant a carob tree,
right?
Not for you to eat from it.
So that's why I went back to, like, I'm not worried about the sages' foresight, right? They saw things down 3,000 years down the line, right? They're playing the long game. The leaders we have right now, and ironically, Bibi, who says, like, my father's an historian and I study history, right? Like, it would be great for you to use those skills right now. But, like, I'm saying it's very difficult to ask someone from a political level to, be looking all the way down, to be like, right now I have to deal with, like, this hot potato, and I can't just like I can't put it down anywhere where like there isn't necessarily damage. But I'm taking a step back for a second. To me, the religious component and like this political issue with, let's say, our neighbors are combined, because like the way I see it, if you're really expressing yourself religiously, you want them to be in the fold. Okay, and I see like the Abraham Accords are like are a data point for that, which is like that is the kind of conversation we want to be having. And I'm not talking to the world right now saying like, look, we've done peace in the past, but like clearly we want to be accepted in the neighborhood, and we're doing what we can to make those deals happen. And the question is it fair for us to say like to identify for ourselves like good Arab, bad Arab, right? And like or do we have to tell ourselves like no, like
I mean, if he's a terrorist, if he's committed crimes, he's bad. If he's preaching to the destruction of Israel, he's bad. That's not like good Arab, bad Arab.
But he's brainwashed. He's a 13-year-old kid. He's not evil. He's possessed by evil.
Okay. I'm not sure what you're aiming at. Like that's true
I guess
for people.
what I'm aiming at
it's not about Arabs, right? Like I have the same feeling. And
right. It's not about Arabs per se, correct? I said Arab because like that's who we're dealing with right now. But it's not like there's like I always say like I have no problem there being like an Arab prime minister, right? As long as he's like correct, like he's down for the game we're playing. And the question is there any version where the problematic population we're dealing with, let's say Gaza and West Bank, are they ever going to want to play the game we're playing?
Let's separate it into two questions, okay? Because I think, at least if I understand you, like there's the question of whether they would want to play a game like the one we're playing, that is
a Western game.
Yeah, they can be a national entity, and we can be a national entity, and we can be separate, right? And there's another question of whether they want to play this game, that is, they all become citizens of this country spreading on the entire territory of the British Mandatory Palestine, right? And then just be a part of the political game in here. And I don't see the second option. Which of the questions are you asking is what I'm trying to say. Do you see a one-state solution?
I could see, I mean, it's not, it could be like I'm dreaming, obviously. Like I could see a one-state solution where like Gaza and the West Bank all become citizens of Israel. There's no right of return, though. You're not bringing in more people. Like in my wand waving, authority I have over here. So, and you get rights to vote, right? If you are aligned with the state, as in there's no like, if I'm hoping that one day there won't be a Jewish state over here, then no, you can't. You can't. The game is you could vote left, you could vote right. You could like taxes high, taxes low. It's the Jewish state. If you're not interested in that, then it's not your game. There's no option of you saying like, well, one day if we have enough people, we're going to turn into something else. No, that's just not. It's not an option. And you could turn it into a more secular Israel if you wanted to. You could, but it's always going to be Israel, and that's the name, and it's the homeland for the Jewish people. Is that possible? Like, probably not. And do you think that's fair for a requirement from the citizen? Like, this is the anthem.
No, I'm just confused. Like, I'm not sure what I'm not sure what kind of response you're asking, because you're talking to me about something that you claim is a dream.
So I'll frame it differently. You're in charge right now, okay?
Okay. I guess.
You make a peace deal, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And everyone's hunky-dory. It's the 67 borders, let's say, okay? And like they get X and you get Y. Then they keep on fucking around. right? What is your response? Where is the limit of your response, basically? Like, how much do you think we should take on as far as like, as long as it's like 10 murdered a year, like it's still worth it to keep on pushing this peace? Like where do you, and again, we know we've made peace before. And I'm asking about like the population that we're dealing with right now, the problematic population. You have, let's say, your 70% in Gaza and your X% in the West Bank. Like you give them a chance and they F around. So like at what point do you feel like, well, we're not dealing with this anymore? And then what does that mean? I'm not dealing with this anymore. Because we both know, like, there's no, let's carper bomb Gaza, right? So that's, children talking, because that's not an option, right? But let's say you like, listen, this population has been 20 years. They're still chanting from the river to the sea. Like, what do you do?
All right.
And my point
basically, whatever I can to thwart the terrorism, promote whatever more positive forces I can, and I guess incremental improvement. Like I'm not sure, like the notion, maybe because I might be misunderstanding you, because the notion I'm thinking you're aiming at is like there should be a peace deal. A peace deal should promote trust, and trust is, has to go both ways. So if you're saying, okay, we give you this, you give us that, let's say like in the Oslo Accords, you have to help us thwart terrorism, and the way in which they thwart terrorism is unsatisfactory by any account, right? Not sure that they really stop all the terrorists, and even when they do, they don't necessarily put them in prison, and like they're kind of cheating their way into this thing. Maybe that's what you're asking, right? When do you say, okay, let's stop the negotiations? Is that the question?
But yes, and what do you do?
Yeah.
Like you make a peace deal, everything's hunky-dory, and then October 7th happens again. Another version like that. Do you then be like, and now we're copper bombing? Or like, no, we just have to find like another option? Like, when do you say like, well, I guess I really need to lose my shit? Like, we need to go crazy because like we just can't deal with this. And you'd be like, Chazi, the answer is never. You never do that because like it's never an option. Like,
well, I mean, I don't know, like option, but it's useless. Like, I don't like just on the very cold calculation, right? That doesn't help you. You covered bomb Gaza, that's gonna have a great impact, like positive impacts on our lives.
This is very controversial, obviously, and we're just, to everyone listening, we're playing in like imagination land right now. But you could argue, right? You could argue that like in 48, right? If Israel did like if they legit did ethnic cleansing, right? They got rid of everyone, right? We wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't be having this discussion. Now, obviously, we don't want that to happen. Now, you could come and say, the world is never going to approve of you doing, let's say, getting rid of everyone right now. But that's
so I read Andrea Weimer, I think. I read the article in Hebrew, so I'm not sure how to express his name in English. It was an article about him. He's like an expert in conflicts and conflict resolution, and just does research on what has happened and what has worked. And he discusses just specifically like the questions of transfer, ethnic cleansing, massive killing, not in the terms of morals, just like specifically, how do conflicts get resolved? What has happened? He said, for instance, the idea that terrorist organizations can be brought down, or like non-state national movements. He talked about the Tamilian Tigers in where is it? In Sri Lanka. So they were basically just militarily defeated, and that has happened, and that's how that conflict was resolved. So you can't say that never happens, which is a claim that some people make, and I think ISIS is also a claim that people make. And though they still exist, ISIS is defeated. It had 12 million people under its rule, and now it has basically, some guerrilla cells somewhere. That it doesn't exist in the way that ISIS exists.
For all intents and purposes, it's been defeated.
Yeah. So like those are things that have happened, and he discusses like ethnic cleansing of different types, and he says 19th century, early 20th century, those are things that happened. They stopped happening, and generally today they are very problematic. Whatever moral standards you have, like even if you remove morals, and like to me, that's why I don't like. Yes, it's morally wrong. It's good that we didn't do it in 48, but also I don't find that discussion to be very interesting if it's also not efficient. So like
Well,
why?
but you're saying it's not efficient. Clearly, North America is not dealing with the natives anymore.
No, yes, but like I said, if the data shows right, like that generally has stopped, and that attempts since the mid 20th century to pursue those kinds of tactics are just bound to fail, even when they had been attempted. And again, that's a question of data, but the data that I've seen at least points to the fact that like that discussion might be or is very likely not relevant. And I'm not sure, like, do you want to go there anyway? We can try, but like that's just why I find it not interesting.
It's less of not going there anyway. It's more about what are your tools to combat that? Like,
I mean, that's a great question, but why wouldn't like peace be a part of your tools? Or generally, let's not even just like peace as this kind of vague notion, but any sort of political understandings, promoting political understandings between the different parties, working on that front, which we have not been doing sufficiently with the Palestinians. Like you can talk about the Abraham Accords, which I think we disagree on different aspects of them.
Yeah.
But generally, with the Palestinians, the promotion of political agreements, of, let's say, reducing the level of animosity and conflict, and promoting more of what we do appreciate, like we haven't been doing that. And there are many indications that we should.
Okay, so what I wanted sort of to flush out from you is sort of what does it look? Yes, I want to attempt peace, right? Let's take a step back again for a second. So, Japan and Germany, America comes in, says, this is the curriculum, these are the teachers, this is what you're going to be learning, and they're down to play with the West, right? The question is, like, what are you doing with the population if they, like, what would be too much to handle? I guess. Now you could say, like, listen, Chazi, October 7th is horrible, and it just pushes us to like move towards peace. And you could be like, why are we having this argument? I just want to see, like, how far do you go with it? You make peace, we try it again, and again we have, like, it explodes in our face. What is the lesson that learned? Is it like at any point is it like, maybe I can't make peace with this, or like that is too much of a defeating attitude, and that could just never be the option. The attitude has to be, there's always going to be peace, and like should it have been attempted with, like, the Nazis? And again, to clarify, Arabs are not Nazis. I'm not saying that at all. Just saying, like,
no, I'll put it
where, and Max. I don't know why I'm being intellectually dishonest, but I'll gladly. You could expand on why you think I'm being dishonest, but I'm not sure what I said right now that was dishonest. But either way, I'm asking you, Gilad, at what point do you be like, well, maybe it's not working?
So you asked about Nazi Germany, right? And I think it's a good example because the world decided, and I think rightfully so, at some point during World War II, that at its current form, there are not going to be any negotiations. This force has to be defeated, right? Not, let's say, appeased in any way. Not as many people say in other political contexts, that it would be bad if any side loses this war. Even not as like the supposed conclusions from World War One would say that like the humiliating peace deals of World War One actually laid the foundations for World War Two. Nazi Germany needed to be defeated, like utterly defeated, in a way that would not be let's say questionable in that sense, and then rebuilt as something else. And I think like there are situations in history where that is a thing, and I think Nazism and ISIS that we've already talked about are two examples of that, where the world just said, no way, no negotiations. This is not some people that can be reasoned with, and now it comes to force. That I think that has to be like an option. But then when you go towards force, right? And you have all of the different tools that go into that. You target the nodes of control, you target the leaders, you whatever you need to do. And that's what we're doing with Hamas. And I think that's like a good thing to do, right? And no argument there. And I don't think that whatever we do now, we need to then somehow make peace with Hamas specifically, because that's an organization that in its charter, like as the way it is defined, it will never abandon its animosity towards us. Like that is where they stand, and
So
that's what
I guess.
we have to find.
So I guess how much of the population in Judea and Samaria, in the West Bank and in Gaza, do you
Why is that the question? Why that wasn't the question with Nazis, right? You didn't ask how much of the Germans do you need to kill in order to stop Nazism.
Vadainat, but I'm asking you now. You attempt to make your peace, okay, and then you see like I guess like what does it need to look like for you? What is like the critical mass where you're like, oh, I'm dealing with like a Nazi problem again? It doesn't matter if it's Arab or if it's French. What like now? Arguably, you could say, listen, if we don't know these stats, but let's say if I show you, listen, 70% of the Gazans are pro-Hamas. And I can be like, we got rid of Hamas. It's been 10 years. They're no longer there. We brought in more money. And they still, 70% still want the destruction of Israel. What does that mean to you then? After 10 years, we poll and we say that's what they want.
Okay, so what it means to me, right?
As a decision maker.
Is that we have a hostile entity, neighboring us. That's what it means to me. Like the neighboring us is better than embedded within us, if they're a hostile entity. And if we need to fight a war against them or against Hezbollah in Lebanon, okay, Lebanon is a country that is not Israel, and I think that's what it should be like, right? Like when you're talking about peace, yeah, we don't have peace with Lebanon, right? Hezbollah is on our borders. We're fighting with them right now. I'm not happy with it, but clearly we can't establish now a peace with Lebanon. The Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza are not separate from us. And,
so
that makes everything so much more complicated.
Completely understand. So in this version, we made peace with the Palestinians. We've given them a state. Okay, now you're saying, listen, Chazi, now it's less of a problem, right? Because now they're a real state. And if they're playing around, now I could be like, well, I'm attacking another state. It's a different game. It's different rules, right? Now,
I won't be that naive, right? But let's say that's my argument.
One second, I want to see over here. Chazi, one second.
I don't see the comments, by the way. Should I go into
YouTube? To even get into it would be too upsetting. You don't seem to be ready to grant any fault for the circumstances. The good question is, why does Hamas exist? I mean, I think this is like a silly conversation, honestly, Max, because, and you're saying the self-righteousness of here. It's very simple. Israel did a lot of bad things. No problem. We did genocide. We kicked people out of their house. All I want right now is 0 death. Don't kill anyone because they're Jews. 0, none. I think that's very fair for me to ask, Max. That's what I want. You could have land, build synagogues. We could pray together. It's all hunky-dory. Don't kill anyone. 0 teaching of death. 0 naming schools after suicide bombers. 0 funding any terrorists. 0, none. So like, it doesn't matter that Israel messed around, and it's all, that could all be true. It's still, we're dealing with people that want to play in the game we're playing today. And the game we're playing today is, if you want to play by the rules, you're welcome to be a citizen of Israel. You have rights. You could have a job. You could be a lawyer. You could be a doctor. You could be a Supreme Court justice. You could be a member of Knesset. That is what I want. That's what I want for all Palestinians. I have a problem, which is, we have tried to do peace time and time again. We've made peace before. So the onus is really on them, so to speak. And is there hardships? Of course there's hardships. Of course we need to be doing more. And I'm completely with you, Gilad, that there's no, and I'm saying this constantly, there's zero conversation, both from secular and religious folk, about, seeing the Palestinian is clearly someone that eventually is going to have to be living here amongst, together with us, recognizing that. I'm trying not to be frustrated. I just saw I'm just seeing like a comment like this. I'm asking you, Gilad. So you're seeing Maxwell saying,
I don't see all the, the other side. Yeah.
The other side literally says the same thing. Do you really think it's just they're both the same, and the other side is saying the same thing, and just like littles?
I wanted to weigh in on that, like while you're talking as well. There's difference between the way we can talk about Israel from within Israel than the way that I would say one should objectively observe the conflict from outside of Israel. Because when I say and I think we might disagree on this, I think we have not done when we made peace deals, I think we should have done better on a lot of fronts, right? Like on the technical sides of how to do them. But when I look at that from the outside and I say, you're not criticizing your own let's say shortcomings, saying okay, so there are many, many elements, and I don't want to go into that because I can send a link to a video that kind of sums it up. Well, if you were to put both sides on equal footing, then it really, there is no consistent way to put Israel as more at fault, right? There's no universal logic that you could say okay, if you follow this logic, then somehow Israel is more at fault, because, right, you say, well, they don't trust Israel because you had, some terrorist attacks. Well, they had more terrorist attacks against us. Well, you kicked them out of the house. Well, they erased Jewish settlements long before 1948 and then started a war, an all-out war, all of the Arab armies against Israel. The equivalence doesn't exist. It's not symmetrical, and I think that's a ridiculous notion to hold. Now,
nice.
So
good sentiment,
so
Max.
does that? I don't know what's maybe not, but does that justify mass murder? And well, you might think that this is hypocritical, but I do think I lend that to both directions, right? There is a massive difference between murder and, for instance, Jewish terrorism is murder, right? When you have Baruch Goldstein going into the Cave of the Patriarchs, that is murder. When you have combatants fighting in civilian clothes within civilian areas, hiding within tunnels under civilian areas, shooting rockets from schools, all of these things are very well documented. You can look at them. Then that is collateral damage. We try to minimize it, but if we have to fight for our people, and that means hurting people in another country when their own leaders and militants are putting them in harm's way by fighting us from there, any country in the world has to defend its citizens by doing that. You try to minimize the civilian casualties, but there is no moral standard that allows you to just let people kill you just to avoid hurting them, right? That's,
I should mention, I should just also mention, to someone like Max, Israel's had something called the blood wedding, where you could see people chanting death to the Arabs. And Israel's had Jews watch the bombing of Gaza in like previous campaigns eating popcorn. The difference is those are far and few between, and most of Israel calls that out. And if there's Israelis that are doing terrorism, you could say they need to be handled with more intensity, but they get arrested, they get tried. This is things that I would say the majority of Israel is disgusted by and calls out. We have 0 schools named after anyone that just murdered Arabs because he wanted to. 0, none. We don't fund anyone that is having that kind of conversation or language. So it's really not even close. And I know you and I both agree with that, but it's in a certain sense, this is a perfect example, like what Max is saying over here, because I believe that even if you made peace and gave them a land and gave them an army and they attacked, you would still be the one to blame. And then I ask people on the left, when are you focused on you and your people, and you have to sort of quiet out noise out there and what I would call like Christian values, and recognize like, no, like this, I can't be living with this anymore. And by living with this, again, I mean, like, I can't be living with someone that doesn't want to play the Western game. And it's not because the Western game is divine. It's because the Western game is the game that we're all playing right now. So like, we don't chop off heads. We don't kill people. So I wonder if the left, quote unquote, at some point could say like, no, I can't play with this person. And I don't want to play with this person. I'm not interested. Like when I look at a population of 70%, I have to be like, well, I guess there's no person here to play with. And at what point do we need to get to a place where you're like, oh, this is like really the enemy? And you could argue, listen, Chazi, like when it identifies itself as, let's say, a Nazi level, right? Then like, we'll talk then. And
I'm saying something else. I'm saying even when it does identify itself as Nazism, then you need to fight Nazism the way we fought Nazism. It wasn't by ethnically cleansing Germans, right? And that's all my point here, right?
But my point is, so good. I'm glad you mentioned that. And I also don't know. My problem is that how do you deal with a population that A, is not interested in Western values, okay? And B, their religion is, or at least the way they interpret it, right, is incompatible with the game you're playing. So you could say, like, listen, Chazi, it's true that Saudi Arabia is also Muslim, but like they are playing a Western game. So, they're keeping it at home, so to speak, or private. If you're dealing with someone that, their intention is, I'm taking back the Dome of the Rock. I want this whole place. This is really mine. If there's a sentiment that this land is really mine, that's not something we could live with. We can't have someone deep down thinking like, what, at some point I'm going to get to this place where really this is mine.
Well, let's be fair. Like I think you said regarding the perceptions of the entirety of the land of Israel, it's like, we're not going to be now taking this, but I feel deep down that, all of this is essentially mine. And I don't think that, like, as long as the eschaton doesn't get immanentized, that's okay, right? Like if you
so of course I could have my sentiment that would be that, like, well, personally, I can't see an eschatological future which doesn't have Arabs inside it or doesn't have Palestinians inside it. So like off the bat, I'm never looking at this as just land that's just Jews and that's it, right? So like but let's even then,
right? Like the Muslim world, and we talked about it, can see a world with Jews. It doesn't need to eradicate Jews. They can have the Banu Israel or however they call them,
Right.
right? As long as they're second-class citizens, whatever it is, right? The eschaton in Judaism is different from the eschaton in Islam, and
Yes.
you can eventually say like we can't live with that, which is I don't see what's the difference between saying what you're saying and between saying that. To me, right, you cannot survive, like you cannot win the game forever, you cannot survive forever, like thinking in those terms where like none of the like the deep down deep seated things are doable, well then nothing is solvable, right? But
Well, I would say that it involves policy, right? So you could say, um, going up to the Dome of the Rock, right, is problematic. However, I could be like, it doesn't matter how problematic it is. The response is never murdering someone, never throwing a rock, nothing. It doesn't matter if you're super angry. Zero violence, zero. And the attitude would be like, of course, like, the Palestinians want to pray where they want to pray and they want to do, of course, we have to allow them to have their religious freedoms. But, you can't have a situation where, you can't have a situation where the population thinks that the anthem is racist. There needs to be
racist. The anthem. What?
I was going to say there needs to be an understanding of like the reality you're in. Like you're in Israel, and that's what it's called, and that's the reality. Like you're telling me right now, Chazi, like I'm doing the best I can to constantly make sure that I'm like seeing reality as it is, right? And then you realize the reality as it is Israel exists. It's not going, and like you just said, there could be like an eschaton conversation, which you could have like yourself, but there isn't conversation. Like you can't have an imam saying, and like there can't be language that's enticing towards any violence, and there can't be language that is bringing in a conversation which is like, oh well, one day the Jews all won't be here. Like,
well, let's say the second comes from the first for me, right? If you're saying there one day won't be any Jews here, you're talking about violence. That's what I always when I spoke to people from the Arab world who said like we think that Israel shouldn't exist, and it's like, what do you mean it shouldn't exist? That doesn't happen without massive amounts of violence, right? Like if what you want is me dead or my family or me deported, like you're talking about all of those crimes that you ascribe to me, you just want to do them back to me, right? That's where I draw the line. When someone is saying like, we think Israel shouldn't exist, like, okay, well, unless you're living in some la la land where we all just, suddenly realize and we just get up and all leave joyfully, right? You're talking about ethnic cleansing and you're talking about massive crimes against millions of people. Not even to speak of the fact that this country is also the home for many non-Jews that see it as their home. So, like to me, that those two are not separate. They come from the same thing, and maybe that's different for you.
First of all, of course, and we need to do more on our side to make them feel like it's their home, right? There was an issue going on in Israel, or still going on, where like you had some extremists spitting at Christians. Now, the good news is all the rabbinic leadership has come out against this, right? We're against this. You can't do this. There's signs in the old city saying like, absolutely not. And that's another example where you have, let's say, bad code, right? You have like maybe a sentence or a line that says like, treat X. And then you'll be like, no, we're not doing that actually. And this, obviously we can't force this onto the Muslim community at large, but at the very least with our neighbors, right? Is it fair to condition and again, I'm just talking out loud right now, to condition religious belief. Obviously, I don't want that done to me, right? I don't want someone conditioning my belief. However, I could say like my belief though is not violent, right? So it's like you never want to tell any mom like, Chezi, listen, at the end of the day, like you just said, you have your own eschatological dreams, right? As do they, and they should be able to allow to speak about that. The problem is like my eschatological dreams have so much variation with interpretation, and so much of that interpretation has already turned into more universal, more loving, more understanding. And the question is like, as a society, like obviously we have to accept like, live and let live. But when you're talking about your borders, can you be like, I'm not interested with that ideology next to me? And that's a red line. Like, because I know that ideology, unless it's reformed, always leads to extremists and violence. Because I can't, there's the way it's built sort of leads us to there.
I mean, it's not that I'm just trying to figure out like what you're proposing. Right? Do I want religious jihadist Islam in my midst? No, I don't. But what are you proposing? Because all I was saying throughout this conversation was, yes, that's a thing. Also, other currents are a thing. I personally know Israeli Arabs. Some of them are mildly Muslims. I don't know someone who's like a devout Muslim personally. And through secular interaction, we can have very positive positive engagements and work together. To me, right, like the extremism is something we need to fight, right? And I'm not okay.
I'm listening.
Yeah.
I'm asking, is that, as careful as I was, is that what you heard me arguing, that I'm arguing for mass murder?
I don't know, and I don't know what you were what this is referring to, but I don't think anyone was arguing for mass murder. If if you could specify what was the way in which that was, like which words were interpreted as that, then maybe we can.
I wish we could live in peace with all Arabs. I love my Muslim brother.
All I'm saying. So I'll just get back to the point.
Go ahead.
I think that the dangers of religious fundamentalism are real, and that we, from our own experience, should know that, from our own history and our experience, we should know that they are not isolated to the Muslim world. Sabra and Shatila in Lebanon was a very horrible example of that happening with the Christians in Lebanon who massacred Muslims, and the current situation where we talked last time that our own extremists, a minister who was convicted of aiding terrorism and had a picture of Baruch Goldstein hung up in his house, the mass murderer that killed 29, I think, Muslims in the Cave of the Patriarchs, being in our government, right? This sort of thing, we need to fight that. And Yuval Diskin in the Gatekeepers, the show about the Shin Bet was talking about the fact, like he said that to him, a Jewish terrorist is orders of magnitude worse than a Palestinian terrorist, because it's a cancer within your own society, right? It's something like an external threat that comes in the form of terrorism is bad, but when you have that inside you and the way that it corrupts our society, that is terrible. And the Jewish underground, right? Like I went through these things just last week, I think, right? The Jewish underground that were caught red-handed putting charges into buses of Arabs, and then they admitted to plans of blowing up the Rock Dome.
The Rock.
Yeah, the Dome of the Rock. They were tried, but they were almost all pardoned very soon after that. Many of them returned to high positions within the religious Zionism. Zambish came to be the head of the Judea and Samaria Council, and Chagai Segal, his father Amit Segal, he became an author and also held important positions. Right? The fact that we allow that, like that, these people, first of all, were already connected to high levels of government when they were under investigation. Right? That's a part of what made the investigation difficult into them. And the fact that we allowed ourselves to sort of say, well, they're one of ours, right? Like that we did not pull that out of us. Mm-hmm. You know, then going forward to the murder of Rabin, where there was, I don't remember the name of the rabbi, but who said in the post event, let's say, coming together after that he knows of rabbis that issued din rodef to Rabin. And you know, the whole, like, I'm saying
this yes. is a minority, though.
Okay, but again, they got 14 mandates.
Wait, 1 second. I want to split two different things. Up until this moment, I want to put aside Ben Gvir and Smotrich for a second. Okay. I'm not saying that this is the case with Zambush, but for example, but there are leaders that do bad things and then they repent, right? There's Ben Gvir saying, I'm going to break your bones. And then ultimately he decides, though, but I'm going to have a Declaration of Independence that says the Arabs can live here as well. Are people allowed to evolve? Number one.
Wait, who said break your bones? You mean Ben Gurion?
Yeah. So that's a horrible statement. But I don't give a shit because later he made a Declaration of Independence that talks about working with Arabs, right? So he's evolving. Or are we saying like, am I going back and saying, like, I'm using an example, Ben Shapiro, who's no hero of mine, like 10 years ago, he has this tweet about like Arabs like to live in their own sewage, right? He's since said that was an embarrassing tweet and I've erased it and I have a thing about the things I regret. It's always used to say like, and Ben Shapiro said this. At what point can you be like, yeah, he said that and now he's no longer like that anymore? Like,
well, once basically, like you have, in this case, what was the crime? What is the punishment by law? Mm-hmm. Serve your sentence. After you've served your sentence, right, you may not get your reputation back,
right?
But like you should show repentance, and maybe you'll be respected. These people were pardoned, right? They did not pose an example to say like, you know what, you can maybe have some bad tweets, but not deposit explosive charges in the buses of Arabs and then get pardoned for it, right? Like I'm not even going to.
Understood. So I'm understood, and that's an extreme case. And you're right; they should have sat in jail longer, and they shouldn't have been able to. Definitely, if not showing any repentance or action change, they shouldn't have returned to political power. Okay. However, we are obviously super sensitive when, like, that happens from within. But my point being is, we do our best, and you can be like, well, here's an example where we failed. But there's plenty of examples where we didn't fail, and we did stop, and we did arrest, and we do condemn, and we come out against it, and the leaders come out against it, and the teachers come out against it, and no one's teaching in schools that's what they should be doing either. So, like, you're giving me examples right now of far and few between people that have done horrible things. That is no way indicative, though, of the population in general and in whole. And that's why, like, these are, like, what are these cases?
What I'm trying to point to, Chazi, is that I think that those are the early warning signs, and even not so early, right? Like, when you have, when you look at a society that has this as, let's say, their MO, right? Like,
yeah.
It's being taught at schools. It's like, I'm not comparing us to Nazi Germany in the sense of the final thing, but there is something about the way the Weimar Republic deteriorated into an idealistic dictatorship that bears, resemblance to processes that are happening here. And again, like, I'm not saying that that's where we're going necessarily. I'm saying something else. I'm saying that if there's a lesson to be learned from what happened there, right, it's that there are signs to notice when it's early. Right?
What are the positive signs? Like, why can't I juxtapose that to what about Naftali Bennett bringing in Arabs into the coalition? Isn't that like a huge deal? And when everyone's like, wow, Naftali Bennett did that. Isn't that worth like 10 of like a terrorist to try to do something? How about the fact that we did do peace with Jordan and with Egypt and with the Accords and with Saudi Arabia? Isn't that be like, well, clearly Jews don't hate Arabs. And clearly that is where they're moving forward. And clearly that's what they want. And that's in the policy. And like, is that like, what is that worth compared to like, why are those actions not speak much louder than, let's say, the words of extremists? Like,
I'll answer if you want.
Right? Please.
Because at least that's how I see it. That's how I see it. That unlike moderates, extremists have an overproportionate effect, right? I think the influence that, let's say, Baruch Goldstein on one side and the bus terrorist bombers on the other had on the politics in Israel in the 90s is far beyond their, individual powers to affect. If we could talk about like the assassination of Rabin, like that was a massive political change perpetrated by basically someone working on his own, right? The reason that I find those things so much more intimidating is because of that sort of leverage. And the research into terrorism also shows like one of the elements that make terrorism so effective is that it forces their own population into their extremism, right? Because basically, let's say so Hamas perpetrates the October 7th events, and yes, the population there was pro-Hamas before, not a good example, but just like the mechanism in general, right? You perform a terrorist attack, now Israel has to respond, and I'm not arguing it has to respond. No country could exist, that allows something like that to happen without responding. And now you have massive attacks, and people are in much more dire straits. Most of them are misinformed, and their only or the main path in which they can go is extremism. This has happened elsewhere, right? Like in every conflict where terrorism.
Wait 1 second. Do they have to? Is the only response extremism?
No, but the mechanism, like I said, just documented, right, over cases of terrorism, is that this is the tendency, or that they gain generally more power through those actions. How do moderates manage to reclaim that? That's a different question, but usually,
I want to. Go ahead. My question was more specific. Like, are you saying that, like, in a certain sense, because of the conditions that we've created, right? Or their reaction.
The extremists exacerbate. I'm not saying this is what we've created and how that makes things worse and what we should have done differently is.
No, I understand. I'm saying the reaction that we should expect. Like, are you saying like we shouldn't be surprised that they're extreme if these are the conditions they're in?
No, that's not what I'm saying. Okay. So it's good that you started clarifying. What I'm saying is that terrorism works in both ways. It makes, first of all, it works in the way of the extreme barbarism is a way to make your opponent make a mistake or play by your game, right? Like that. The point is to make your opponent stop thinking straight because of the shock value that it has. That's why ISIS decapitated people, right? Like that was a part of the point. And the second thing is that by resorting to terrorism, and usually it goes both ways, and with Hamas it's the same. Right? They terrorize us, but they terrorize their own population. They bomb them on their way to evacuate from the north of the Gaza Strip, right? And they create blockade. They use their own citizens, in ways that are, terrible. So, putting all of those things together, it's why terrorism is so effective. And what I'm pointing to in our case is, I feel and this really goes back to a lot of our conversations, when I point at like the basic level of sanity, right? Like the level where I'm saying, like, whatever your agenda is, you got to be against that. I feel that like the people who don't agree with me are usually not calibrated enough for that fear, and that's why I'm pointing to us.
My argument would be, and I know you can't say it so lightly, right? Like, I agree with you that the fact that, again, I look at Ben Gvir different than Smotrich, and I'm not a fan of both of them. But like the fact that like the fact that he made it into power, right, is very problematic. Same thing goes with very problematic Arab members of Knesset that are in power, because their comments are also like off the reservation. And you could argue like, well, if I'm going to have someone like this inside, it's not crazy for me to have like an extremist Jew. I'm not saying that's healthy. I'm just saying like someone could be like, well, that's represented, right? So like, why am I not represented in a certain case? And you could be like, even if that's true, Chezi, I would be a lot less concerned if Ben Gvir had like 4 mandates, but he doesn't have 4 mandates. He has 14 mandates, and he has a tremendous amount of power. So you and I are in agreement that is a red light. My point saying that red light is not a red light on the operation. Like, I look at Israel as like success story, amazing, like fantastic, a blessing to the region. It should be like, just like Israel, like, way to go, amazing. And there's a sense where like now you have a Ben Gvir, right? Or let's take a step, let's go further back. You have an assassination of Rabin that happens by a religious Zionist, an extremist, obviously, but then the whole religious Zionist camp gets painted as problematic. Not anymore, but there was a time where.
But there was a time like that. That time was so like
specific,
restricted in time that, like, in the next election, the right wing won. Like, it wasn't that even after Rabin's assassination, right? Peres was a temporary prime minister, and then Netanyahu won. Right? That's like, the assassination led to a political change, and the religious Zionism, right, got like basically political power increased out of it. So like, it's, I don't see how
I'm not arguing that things became more left. I'm arguing that
I'll just add one thing to that, like the sentiment, and I wasn't old enough to like confirm it, but the sentiment that I hear of people on the left is that after the murder of Rabin, there were all of these conversation circles, and these let's come to unity and let's understand each other. And today, and long before today, they feel completely betrayed. They feel like all of that actually what they really were the people dancing on the street. And all of that after that is just to comment, like, to subjugate us into still following that regime. And I think that sort of break of trust, right, that sort of animosity within our people, I feel that those things, like the rise of Ben Gvir, those are so deep threats to our country. And like, in a way, I don't have the option to, let's say, see Israel as just because of being younger, right? I can't see the same. There are things that I will take for granted, even if I try not to. But I certainly don't take them for granted in the sense that I genuinely fear for them to be taken away. And I feel that, like I said, it's not even that you don't see this or that you don't understand that it's bad. Like, it's that, and I think that there's generally like the problem that of two political sides not seeing each other. The fears are probably the most important things. Like when the, let's say, more right-wing leaning, globally, are saying, all of these things with, let's say, COVID are leading to totalitarianism, and the left wing is like, what the hell? Like, it's vaccines, they're good. right? They're not understanding, right, what the fears that are driving the other side are and why they are important and legitimate. You could argue about policy, but you need to see the fears and why they matter.
So I think part of what we're exploring right now is arguably after the assassination of Rabin, right? The fear on the right, right? You could be like there was a conversation of unity and talking together. The fear was like, can't you see how horrible the Oslo Accords are? And we could get into like, well, we didn't keep our end of the deal, but the attitude was like, you are being blind from seeing that, which you could argue leads up to.
You mean after or before? Because that was the conversation long before the like.
No, that was the conversation before, which culminated, let's say, in the assassination. But even afterwards, the conversation was like, there was a sense where like on the left, and this was sort of the conversation we were having today, which is like, at what point do you, I feel like on the right, there was a sense of like, we are not the priority. The priority is like peace in the Middle East, or like peace, even if we lose more soldiers, or peace, even if Israel becomes smaller, or peace, even if Israel becomes like less religious. And you had a sense from the right, which is like, no, no, no. That's not what we want. Don't see us as citizens of the world. See us as citizens of Israel, Jewish people that are also playing a democratic game. And the fear was like, no, we're being pulled into, we're just going to, eventually we want to turn into Switzerland of the world. And in Switzerland of the world, we don't have this conversation of like Jewish also. There's a place for everyone. And like we could sit with Arafat. He's a good. That's the person.
I'm confused. Why were the Oslo Accords threatening the ability to be Jewish, and why would they make Israel?
The Oslo Accords, for example, saying, "How are you giving people like this guns?" Right? There was all these signs, Al Titnu Lahem Rovim, and we know now that many of those guns that we gave them were used for terror and for killing. Right? And the attitude was like, "Can you not see the enemy in front of us?" And in brackets,
like again, two things I'm just trying to figure out, because I want to make sure I understand you. The claims about hurting our personal security through the Oslo Accords, I've heard a lot, and I get the claims, and we can discuss why we have different views on it. But how are the Oslo Accords related to making us more of a Switzerland? I don't understand.
No, the attitude is, and this goes back to, let's say you're in charge, right? And like you make peace, which is how far are we going to go? And you can be like, well, as far as we can, right, to achieve peace. And the attitude is, does the left recognize, right, that there are bad actors? Or is it like, no, we just have to keep on, we're too extreme. We need to do more concessions. We need to try to figure this out. And I believe that.
But again, I'm with you. The fear that the left wouldn't recognize that there are real bad actors and that sometimes force is necessary. I get that fear. I don't think it was fair to point that at Rabin, because
agreed.
It was like, even within his dealings with Arafat, he was not trusting, and he was not painting him as.
I also think if he wasn't killed, he would. I mean, arguably, you could say he's more right wing than many. Like,
yeah.
Right. So, like, I'm not laying it on Rabin's.
Okay. So again, but that okay. Again, you making an additional claim, maybe it was misplaced and you want to take it back. But how are the Oslo Accords related to making Israel less religious, or more like Switzerland?
It's not making it less religious. It's saying that like the concessions that we need to make, okay, and the mindset we need to have is we should force ourselves to see this as a genuine partner. And while I want to have genuine partners, the fear would be, right, like the unfortunate case of the people living in the outskirts of Gaza who are attempting to make peace with the Gazans, who then got murdered by people that they let into their homes because they gave the terrorists the lay of the land. And the question is that indicative of a larger trend, which is like, can you not see that that they're like, we can't play with these people? And if I'm being told by the left constantly, like, no, but we can. We just need to figure out another way to do it. And like, it's because we have like these extremists in the government that like that's the reason why we're not going to have peace, because like they're taking us too far right, and we're not going to be able to bridge that gap anymore. Now, arguably, you could say someone says like, that's very nice. I want the guy that told me it's okay, and this is not me. I want the guy that told me it's okay to have guns and to arm myself, because it's the guy that's seeing the picture that these guys want to come over the fence and murder me. So you could talk to me about peace, but I want the guy that is looking at reality, like Gilad is trying to say, and Ben-Gvir is going to come and say like, I don't care what you say. Those people over there, the second they have the chance, they're going to want to murder you. And lo and behold, guess what? They went crazy. And by they, I'm not generalizing, not everyone, but the question is like, does the left see, and I don't know if you would agree with this or not, but you could see that seemingly there's a conversation right now in Israel that like there's, the left sort of opens its eyes, or there's people in the left that now like will never be able to go back to what was before. But is there a sense where this was always the writing on the wall? We just didn't want to see it based on, let's say, and this is where it connects to the Jewish. Is this like a liberal take where like, no, if we give them money and we teach them, like they're going to want to play nice? Or is there an attitude which is like, no, I have a mindset that this is someone that sees me as an enemy, and this is someone that, and the way I frame it as an enemy and why the land is important is I have a religious framing as well. So there was a seeming on the left saying one of the issues in the way of peace is also this religious outlook of the country. And I would agree with you. It's extreme if Ben-Gvir comes and says, or Smotrich says, like, all the land is ours. On the flip side,
that's what the claim is, right? The claim the claim is the notion of Eretz Yisrael Shlema, the idea that we should settle all of the land of Israel religiously as Atchalta de Geula,
right?
The fact that we are putting civilians just in the midst of the Palestinian archipelago of the West Bank, right? In a way that is just inseparable, right? The settlements, if you look at the map, right, they're just slotted in between any major center.
Remove all the settlements.
I'm just saying, like, first of all, like the notion is that would be very hard, and it's getting harder and harder, right? Like there are hundreds of thousands now, but and if you're having a plan that's saying like we should separate, this is making it harder. Like you can like it or not, and again, the notion is not like you should not have religious beliefs, but if your beliefs, like we were talking before, are about, and this is also something that obviously he talks about this notion that like the 6-day war happened because we were granted this victory by God, and then the Yom Kippur War was a sign that we didn't follow God's mission, right, which is to settle more of the land.
I was just going to say, this is not the opinion by all national religious thinkers.
I understand it's not, but like the group that a lot of religious Zionists claim have hijacked it and that are holding the power now, this is their Merkaz Harav, the people that brought forth Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. Those are the sort of notions, and I do believe, and I mean, I'm with obviously on that is very problematic in the way of, a lot of what we want. I think both you and I want to see happen here. Now, regarding your claim about whether the left wing has finally opened its eyes.
But before you jump on that, I just want to add a point that I agree with you that language like the greater Israel, right, is counterproductive and dangerous, right? The problem is even a conversation of, but I want to go to the Temple Mount, also that's considered dangerous. And even if I draw Muhammad, also that's considered dangerous. And dangerous to the level of like, but if you do that, I am going to lose my shit. And the answer is like, no, there's no doing that. And there's a sense where the right feels from the left, which is like, can you just be quiet with all those religious stuff? because like that causes issues. And the attitude is like, no, like it doesn't need to.
I think where we agree, right, on that is the attitude of just be quiet, please, right? The absolutely, let's say, short-sightedness of politics all over the world is a huge problem. The idea that something like Charlie Hebdo happened and it didn't lead to, let's say, the police enforcement of the law in all of the no law zones in France, which promote these terror cells, is a problem because politicians don't want to be the ones to actually deal with problems because that would make them less popular, right? So I think that's like whatever you want to say, left wing, right wing, freedom of religion. If you allow places to exist within your country where there is like your law doesn't stand and people can just preach to extremism and terrorism and whatever, yeah, I totally understand the right-wing sentiment. They're saying like, how the hell is that doable? Like, how is that something you can just accept, right? And I understand that this inaction and this hypocrisy is leading to an increase in extreme right leaders all across Europe, right? I don't think that this is the inevitable result of Muslim immigration, which many in the right believe. I do think that if you do it so poorly and you don't deal with problems when they arise, and they have arisen so long ago, then you're going to make things really shit, right? And that's why I think it is really important to listen to people's fears, to really listen.
So we were going now about like when I stopped you about the left, quote unquote, opening its eyes.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see who on the left, and I mean up to Shlomi Eldar, who spent a lot of time in Gaza when it was still possible to visit there. I don't think anyone serious on the left was thinking, man, these Gazans and Hamas, they're really nice people, right? We just need to lend a hand out for peace, right? Because Hamas, they speak our language, they share our values. Let's just sit near the table with them, right? And like I told you, I think it's hard to find someone who's more, let's say, committedly left-wing. You can find a lot of the idiot left, right, all over the world, right? Queers for Palestine, you can find anywhere, right? I don't think they're the mainstream of anything. But when you're talking about like serious people, politicians, people within public office that have left-wing views, right? No one was thinking, man, Hamas is just like that. They're the real people we need to have the conversation with, and we should go for the extremists, right? And again, like I find it. This is, you sent me this, and you said you were talking exactly like the thing by Efraim Herrera. I was just like a combination of dumbfounded and infuriated by their
conversation,
conclusion of their conversation, their final remarks, where they were saying like, yeah, the problem, like people are blaming Netanyahu for what happened, and they're right. They should be blaming him for listening to them. And really, the left wing and any left wing ideology has been not only outside of power, it has been demonized, right? Completely outside of just legitimacy, just to even discuss these ideas, and then like when something happens, you keep blaming them. Like, how long can you keep kicking that dead horse?
But it's not. It's just not. It's when you say dead. I agree with you that they're not have been in power. The argument would be on the right that between the court system and the media and like that.
It's a very convenient argument. Very convenient. Like you have basically control over all of those things, right? There's media outlets. Israel Hayom was by Sheldon Adelson, who was very close to Bibi. You have 12 and 13, which are, calling them left is I think a stretch, right? Like who, Raviv Drucker and Baruch Khan, who's leftist on these channels?
You don't think Raviv Drucker is left? I mean,
that's my point. Like
you could say, by the way, you could say, but this goes back to like, so, you and I are looking at the world differently in this case, because I totally see him as left and you're like, the guy's barely left.
I'm saying that the fact that he is left and I can see him as that doesn't mean that the channel is left. Like the fact that they have a fig leaf, right? Like doesn't make the whole thing left wing. And the general thing is like, to me, if you wanted to make that claim, right, there are two problems with it. One is like you can never lose, right? It's kind of like in physics with string theory. Whatever you don't find in the current accelerator, string theory isn't dead. You just need a bigger accelerator, right? Like what? And when you tear apart the media system and you bring your own newspaper and you appoint your own judges and they don't do what you think. And Mandelblit, the appointed counselor, the
Attorney General.
Attorney General that you appointed is saying that you should stand trial for your crimes, and the chief of police that you appointed, somehow is like everyone that goes against you is corrupt, and somehow like with the system. How can you lose this game? You can make that claim forever until you break everything down, which is like I said, that's why the sense is, in this entire government, let's burn everything down. Because if you're this is going back to where I wanted to start this conversation, but we went in different directions. You were saying, right, in the last conversation, that Bibi has 3 indictments, but we know that some of them are bullshit. Like, I don't know that some of them are bullshit. If we believe that our institutions are so corrupt that within all of this scrutiny, 3 different indictments, right? A potential 4th that, for security reasons, might just not be on the table, right? If we believe that those are bullshit, right? That's tantamount to saying, right, when we need to choose between replacing that one person or everyone, we choose to replace everyone.
I would ask you like this. These cases against Bibi, right? Let's say you find out, like a Russiagate situation, it was bullshit, or at the very least, it's not. It doesn't. And in aggregate, it's not a legal issue. Okay, I'm not saying that there was no improper behavior, but let's say there's no legal issue. Let's say you find out that being true. What would that mean to you? Like I'm okay if he ends up being like they found him guilty. Great, you guys did what you needed to do. Let him sit in jail. Unfortunately, there's a chance that maybe there is some fuckery going on. And what does that mean to you if there is fuckery going around? What does that mean to you? Let's say you find out that they all crumble. The judge decides, listen, there's nothing there. What does that mean? What would that mean to you?
That depends on different things, right? First, right, if that happens, then you have to consider, right, the failing of so many institutions, right? Like the Government Justice Council, the state attorney, the judicial system, like in general, like all of those things. And right,
About just to say
The question again, like the fact that he could be found, let's say, not guilty, that's trial, right? That you don't generally say like, oh, well, we should never try someone if there's a chance that they're not guilty, right?
Vadai.
Yeah,
I'm saying,
if it comes out that it was, like you said, like all fuckery, that it was all just, complete hot air,
not complete,
Jewish
50%.
Jewish underground like style, that there were people in these places, they had an ideology and they were pushing that without any restraint at all. Right? If I have evidence of that, these institutions need to be cleansed.
Wait. I want more than that from you, though. I want to understand, like, more than like the institutions need to be changed. What would you think then about Bibi and the general narrative that you were quote unquote sold for X years? Because you could say, listen, Chazi, the courts will decide at the end of the day. But let's say the courts decide not because like tremendous levels of fuckery, but let's say they're saying, listen, it tantamount to like a real case that we could play with. Okay. Wouldn't you be like, hey, media, why were you doing this? Why are you selling this as like, this is happening, it's happening, we're going to get him, it's happening, we're not going to sit with him, we're not going to go in the elections with him, like, it's happening? Like, do you think the narrative was like, we'll see what happens in court? Or the narrative was like, there's no way he's walking away from that, we totally got him, it's a smoking gun? Like, think of and you and I have agreed about this already in the past, about like the narrative that like the media sells, unfortunately. But I guess I would want to hear from you if you found out that like all the 3 cases flopped, that like there is something very, very stinky over here, something very rotten, if that was the case. And okay. I would assume that I'm sorry?
What is the question specifically?
I guess I would want there to be like a moment of like, maybe I'm not looking at this clearly. Maybe I'm being sold like a narrative that's just not true. Maybe people maybe they so want Just Not Bibi that they were willing to do such a move. And we could argue if it's true or not. Do you think?
But again, none of that happened.
Right? Yet.
Okay. None of that. There are no signs. There are no concrete signs, right? Except for propaganda that is coming from the defendant. Right.
Let's say you're telling me the judges didn't tell the prosecution that you have a very weak case over here of bribery.
They told them, right, specifically about whether it's bribery or deceit and break of trust or whatever, whatever the charge is. Like, that's something that happens in court. Like, you decide whether you have enough evidence for
I agree.
This charge or the other charge.
Why is the media and members of Knesset saying bribery? Like, why are you all saying that? If like the judge tells you like, no, but it's not. Is anyone going to walk that back? Is anyone going to be like, listen, by the way, it's this other thing, it's not bribery? Or be like, it doesn't matter. Like, that's the term we're going to use because we want to get this guy out.
You're asking me why people use the more severe term to describe. I'm
asking you, is your expectation, Yair Golan, right?
Okay.
He comes out and calls Bibi was convicted. Bibi is taking bribes, right? And the court comes and says that didn't happen. Would you want him to say like, I was wrong about that? Or just be like, so what if the courts didn't see it? He's still playing around. Like, at what point do you be like, well, you were wrong. He didn't do that. So you shouldn't have said that. And you could have also caused like a whole ripple effect by constantly saying that. Is there any responsibility?
Of course, everyone should speak the truth. And if you're not speaking the truth, and we've talked many times about like speech in the media and everything, you should speak the truth. But I don't understand like the notion that you're taking the media hype, you're taking the appearances of all of this. And yes, people are obsessed with appearances. They could say things that they shouldn't be saying. All right. When I strip that down, look at the agreed upon facts. You have Bibi indicted on 3 different court cases that, without being a legal expert, don't seem to be so clear cut to be like, oh, none of this is anything. right?
I'm with you, and I was also sure that he was like, if this was X years ago, I was sure like, listen, it's a done deal. The guy's like, there's way too much smoke for there not to be fire, but it seems like they somehow still haven't locked it down on him.
Well, that's not evidence. That's a part of the.
I understand it's not evidence. It would be reason for me to stop and think. What? 1 second. Is there any version, right? Or maybe my party's corrupt. Maybe my party's messing around, and maybe both of them are corrupt.
Well, first of all, we know that both of them are corrupt, at least to certain extents, right?
So you're right. That's fair to say, and I would also agree that you could say that, like maybe definitely in the last potentially 9 months, you could see more games happening on the right hand side. Where you could be like, well, this is what I'm looking at, and like here I'm seeing more of this shtick happening, specifically with regards to the courts.
Look, if we're talking about the courts and we want to talk about speech, right? Like if I'll give an example because I was thinking about that just now, right? We were talking about like the reform or the coup and like the general idea of saying, this is a very important thing, but also it's a very, very small change and it wouldn't really matter, but also it's really, really critical and we have to do this right now on, more important than anything else, and we're going to fight to the death for it, right? Like, I cannot look at that and say, like, seems legit, right? You look at that and you say, like, that's ulterior motives. I can't read that differently.
Agreed. On the flip side, I also can't take seriously someone saying fascist state is going to turn into fascist state. That's it. It's not a democracy anymore. It's all nonsense, garbage.
Well, we talked about it last time, and I don't see how you're ignoring that. Like I said, if you have in your country the police on uniform protesting in front of the unit that's supposed to be investigating police, that is a very bad sign to say.
You're right. On the flip side, protests for 9 months, right? Crazy violent protests that don't get hampered.
Crazy violent?
I mean, and by violence, I mean blocking the highways, which we discussed last time.
But let's not call blocking the highways violence.
Sure. Okay. Well, sure. Not violence. Very disruptive, illegally disruptive protests for 9 months. It doesn't happen in democracy. In fact, in fascist states.
What do you think? I wanted to start with this. First of all, what do you think about the truckers' protest in Canada? You remember that? I think it's 2021.
Yeah. You mean when Justin Trudeau froze their accounts? Yeah, pretty crazy.
Yeah, froze their accounts. Right? Yep. They basically parked their cars in the main road, like in front of the Parliament building. They had some inflatables, right? And they were on strike, right? They did things that they were disruptive, right? And they weren't going anywhere. And they said, like, we're not violent. He said, look at them. They're Nazis. They're violent. They're holding our country captive. Turned on the Emergency Acts law and basically brought in the police special forces to, get them out of there. What do you think about it? To me, that seemed like a mirror image of what I see, like, since the Balfour days in our protests, right? You have protests, which I've been to, like, hard to imagine more peaceful protests. I saw live streams from the ones
peaceful up until anyone's blocking the highway. Protest for 7 years, zero blocking. Just there's the law, right? Because I'm saying if you could block the highway, then Bibi could take money, right? We're all just the law is an idea. It's a concept.
With all the this is a complete false equivalence, right? You're talking about like blocking the highway. First of all, one thing that you said, which is false and has been demonstrated to be false, is that protesters somehow blocked ambulances. That did not happen. It was fake news, and it was something that Bibi tweeted. Did not happen. The Israeli Red David Star came out with an announcement that there were no cases in which they were blocked. There were videos when an ambulance was like kilometers away. The protesters just, cleared away, like the parting of the Red Sea, right? Like
I stand corrected. I want to get home with my son. Get out of my way.
yeah.
I
So
want to get home now.
maybe maybe the Smotrich's brother tweeted something that would work, right? Oh, this is when someone just ran over protesters, like that's a normative protest. Thinking about freedom of movement, right? Like the blocking of the highways. Okay, let's put it like this, right? Is this a let's say excluded from normal conduct? Sure, it is, right? This is not something that you do. Definitely, and by the way, it's not the first protest that blocked the highways. Like even the handicapped.
Yes, for this length.
For this length every time, for this many amount of cases?
For 9 months worth. I'm not saying it happened every night of the 9 months. I'm just saying it happened many, many, many times. And like blocking the closing off. Now you could say like, listen, it applied pressure on Bibi at the end of the day, like, threatening to close the airport. Who do you think you are?
Okay, so the point is, and this is, I think, what what I wanted to point to, to begin with, right? The Canadian economy, right, was relying on truckers. It was disrupting Trudeau's ability to run the country, right? I see that protest as being very democratic. Who do they think they are? They are the civilians, and they are making their stand. If you're willing to, say, like,
are you willing to get arrested? No problem.
Yeah, willing to get arrested.
But so the difference is, and not that he's like a hero, but let's say Feiglin was talking about this a lot. When he was protesting, his attitude was like, he told the people, bring together with you toothbrush and things like that, because you're gonna get arrested because you're breaking the law. And no one on the left thought they should be arrested because we're allowed to do this. Don't try to arrest me. What am I doing wrong? What you're doing wrong is you're breaking the law. You could protest, not this way. And if you don't get it, then you're an anarchist. You can't just do what you want because you're like, if they're going to do this, like, the media, like, I agree with this. It doesn't matter
if you're going outside, and this is the point that I started with, right? I agree. The left should have been more aware and more, let's say, determined to get arrested, right? As a part of the protest, right? That they should have been willing to do that. I think, in general, a lot of them were. Like the fact that basically they were never actually.
Why were they not actually arrested?
Well, they were arrested. That they were never actually held for extended periods of time is the phrase I was going to say, is because eventually they were not found to be in violation of the laws. And the Justice, like Iwamoshi,
who's not biased at all, right? She's like,
look, you can say that everyone that disagrees with you is biased, but I don't see. Look, I mean, yeah, you can say that she's biased, but that was the decision made, right? Like, and then you say, like, why do the left agree with that, right? Look, that's what they were told. They were told this justice, this isn't the Iwamoshi, is saying that this is where the line is drawn, that disrupting freedom of movement under the balances of the different freedoms is allowed because no protest can have an effect without disrupting public order to a certain extent.
Right? Besides, we just didn't allow the Ethiopians to do that, and we didn't allow the Arabs to do that, and we just didn't allow the right wing to do that with the disengagement. But you're allowed to. It's a new law.
So the question of whether that's allowed or not, right? Are you going to be
okay? Are you going to be okay if the courts decide right now that whatever they decide it's something about the ultra-Orthodox, and the ultra-Orthodox say, forget this, for the next 10 months, we're just blocking all the highways? Are you going to be like, listen, like, that's the new tool? So
my whole point here is like, if you do something where you're bringing a huge part of your population hundreds of thousands, probably over 1 million people, to the point where they're saying this is something we can't stand, right? And they're willing to block the highways, then you need to figure out what the hell you're doing wrong. If you're saying that the response to that should be hit them harder, arrest more of them, break their bones, if that's the response, then I think you don't that's a misunderstanding of democracy.
1 second. You have tools though, right? For example,
you said electing someone else last time,
second.
and that's exactly where I disagree.
Arguably, you could say the reason it got to that level is because you didn't crack down on it early enough. And the reality is there's an opposite force which allows you to try to control this kind of thing. And the attitude is like, yeah, you could have protests, but let's say once they started blocking the roads, let's say they started arresting people, right? And then people are like, listen, this is too crazy. We're not doing this. And maybe the protest would have lasted 3 months, right?
Very likely, Ozzy, very
Yeah.
likely if, and this is, again, from different cases, and I wanted also to ask you about 2014 Maidan in Ukraine. Let's see what your opinion is about it. But the very likely reason why people were not arrested for longer periods of time and why the police didn't crack down more on this is not because they didn't deal with it early enough or something like that, because generally when you start doing that, things escalate to become worse.
Besides with the ultra-Orthodox, the Ethiopians, and the right wing. Then it's okay to just put them in jail, crack down, smash heads, and just lock that down quick within like a day or two.
If you're talking about the scales and the level of
they can never grow to that size if you get water cannoned right away and you get arrested right away, and if you get put into isolation right away, then there's no incentive to keep on doing that, right? If I have a law right now, if my cops decide, listen, people are breaking in, but we could arrest them, but instead we're just going to give them like a slap on the wrist, then more and more people are going to do that. And you could say like you've created a situation because you were more lenient, where now you have sort of a situation where you can't put back in the box, and like it's too late. Bibi can't water cannon 3,000 people. That would be nuts. So that's no longer a tool. And he can't arrest. He doesn't even have room to arrest so many people. But it got to a critical mass because I was being okay with it. And the media was saying if I arrest them, then I'm being fascist. And the media said if I have cops over there, they're being too violent. Okay, so the airport is closed. People are going on strike. I can't arrest people. I can't stop people. So I don't have any tools. And then you're saying, and look at it. It just grew and grew and grew and grew and grew. I guess, like, I'm saying that part
First of all, the level of like blocking roads, right? The amount of protests that were at that level was very very small compared to the protests in general, right? Like the amount of people, the amount of people in Kaplan every evening compared to the amount of people in Ayalon, like there were hundreds of thousands in Kaplan and much less in Ayalon every time. Like generally how like you would have less than 5% of people would go on to block roads.
I don't know.
You didn't have 100,000 people in the road.
We could look at the stats. How many, like I'm looking right now, I just wrote in like how many times was Ayalon blocked, right? And it's not giving me an answer right now. I'm just seeing article after article. Ayalon blocked for hours. Ayalon blocked for an hour. Ayalon blocked for 3 hours. Ayalon blocked for 2 hours. Like, what does that mean? Like, what is the critical mass where you're like, oh, this is too much? Do you think when they closed the airport, it was like, oh, maybe we went a little too far?
Look, if you want to crack down on it, like that's the thing. If you're saying, yes, there have been protests where the police have cracked down with varying degrees of violence and simply put this thing down when it was small. First of all, whether that was the right thing or not the right thing to do is a question. I don't know if the answer was, yes, that was a great idea. I don't know if that was very democratic. And I don't know if there were cases where the protests were violent. And when they are violent, when there is force applied towards either the police or other citizens, right? That's a line that has to be dealt with, as okay. That's how I see it, right? Like you're saying, blocking the road is not.
I want to open up violence, okay, to people talk about violence as speech, which I don't agree with, but like if you are completely blocking me from getting anywhere I need to go, I don't know if we should call that violence, but that is a problem. You are imprisoning
a problem. You're not imprisoning. Let's not use language that's like inappropriate. Come on. You're not imprisoning civilians. You're impeding their freedom of movement. Very severe, right? Like, I want my freedom of movement, but I'm not imprisoned. Come on.
Well, if I try to move my car and you start smashing it, what is that violence?
Yeah, if I start smashing your car when you try to move it.
How about you don't smash my car? You just smack the mirror, and my kid is now terrified and is urinating in his bed.
Those were cases that happened. I think there were 3 of them overall that I heard of.
There's a famous case where someone broke a windshield. I'm talking about cases where just like kids being panicked from people smacking the car. No one was hurt. Nothing was broken. Just intimidation.
Yeah, don't smack cars. I was in protests where cars are trying to get through. Like, what? 99% of the time, it was just people standing there. Now, if you had someone trying to kind of force their way through protesters, like threatening their physical security by running them over, then usually protesters would respond with a fair bit of like distress at that. They didn't like it. And sometimes maybe they would bang on the car, right? But generally, like, I don't see how that would be compared to saying like these protesters were walking around like just with these cars of people frustrated that they can't go, and then just like sitting in their cars innocently, and people were just smacking their cars. That did not happen. Like, this was not a show of violent force towards people in their cars.
I think there was definitely a feel of either you're with us or against us.
I was in my car blocked, like right where the road was blocked several times, right? People were literally standing in front of me going like this.
Yes, there were cases like that as well. You're right. And maybe I'll go with you that the majority was not as
the ones that were not like this should have been handled strictly.
I also want to mention, and I'll need to end on this point. Just, you said, like, listen, Chazi, hundreds of thousands of people are coming. And at that point, like, the government needs to realize you got to deal with this, and you can't just deal with this by like imprisoning people or like, right. I would say, what about the 2.3 million people that'd be like, no.
That's exactly my point, Chazi. If you're thinking about it as the 2.3 million people that want to impose their will, regardless of you got the government, right? That's not what democracy is about. The fact that you have government doesn't mean that you now have unlimited power. And furthermore, even if you have certain power and you're using it, and this goes towards the ultra-orthodox as well, you're using it to hurt what is, closest to heart for a very large part of your population, and very large can be 5%, right? Right. The fact that you're doing that means you should be, taking a moment to reconsider. I'm not saying
like the Oslo Accords or the disengagement or making the peace deal with like the gas deal with Lebanon, all those things, right? Like, they should have been
all of those things. When you tell me what those things should have been done, yes, I think in all of those cases there should have been better like public dialogue, and there should have been a way to see how you could move forward in a way that is not so destructive. But this goes back, I think, to the previous point about like bad actors. Yes, you should realize that there are bad actors. If you're now pinning your own population and saying like, okay, 5% of these are bad actors, you better be damn sure, right? Like if you're saying that now the people are like, these protests are so out of place that like this needs to be just put down, right? You better be sure at the level of like civil war against these people.
Well, you could be sure as the law is being broken.
Again, like the level at which the law is being broken and what exactly is happening, like those are
I hear what you're saying.
Those are not like you can say right, well, the law is being broken. Well, the law is broken a lot, and the government has been breaking the law much more. The right wing has been breaking the law through years and years, a lot more than the left wing has in blocking roads during this time. And I mean, within protests, especially, let's say, considering the protests during the Oslo Accords with Rabin's pictures being like, if you're telling me where you should not have made concessions, right? When you have pictures of Rabin in SS uniforms, when these pictures
people were arrested. People were arrested for that. People were put away in the disengagement. People were put away for a long time. Ultra-Orthodox get beaten the shit out of.
Yeah.
And obviously that's also due to othering, right? And you could say there's a sense that the police feels more open to do that and feels less open to do that to quote unquote like people that they recognize.
No, I think that like what happens, and this is like there was a case in Bet Shemesh where there was they reported to the police about a corpse in someone had died and there was a corpse in one of the apartment. The police went there. They were stoned. Their police car was stoned. They didn't get this dead person, and they had to get out, right, for fear of their own safety. When has this anarchist left ever done something so anarchist? Right? There are places in our country that are like that. And when you say like why the ultra-Orthodox are met with more violence, well, some of it, not all of it, some of it comes to the violence addressed towards the police.
Agreed.
And the fact is that it works, which is worse, right? Because the police can afford to be more violent
with its own population, by the way, because in East Jerusalem, for example, where we don't collect a lot of taxes and we don't collect a lot of property tax, is because it's too dangerous to send collectors inside there. So the government's attitude is like, listen, like I could crack heads for ultra-Orthodox, but if I start cracking heads of Arabs, it's going to be an international thing. So like, I guess like we just got to deal with it.
But that's the problem I mentioned before, right? Like, so we can talk about this next conversation because I know I need to go, but I wanted to start with this, but we got dragged into other.
All good. I agree with you though that we cannot let the extremists amongst us dictate the agenda of the day. I agree with you that we need to be vigilant when we see indications that things are going astray, and we have to respond to them quickly and forcefully. And I agree with you that Bibi has royally, Bibi and his coalition definitely, and specifically this iteration of it, has royally screwed up in many cases. And it's not a cop-out where I'm saying like they all got to go. I honestly think they all got to go. And like and we'll continue this conversation, of course, but why I think this conversation is important, because it really is like you're mentioning, like where can you identify the fears and where the differences are, like between, the parties, and do they really see each other, right? Because like there are conversations here that you would agree with me and I agreed with you, and there's sentiments over here you're like, I hear you're saying, Khadi, but like I disagree with you. And then there's a real sense of like, am I seeing a skewed reality? Are you seeing a skewed reality? Am I seeing like a semi-skewed reality sprinkled with my own bias? And it's very hard to, sort of to clear, to see it clearly in that. And I could only hope that with more data and more conversation, we both will have a clear understanding and a better vantage point of the lay of the land, so to speak. So I very much appreciate this conversation.
Me too. I'll just end like for the one with one like item to consider for next time is I want to hear from you. When do you think the line is drawn? Right? Where do you think the line is drawn in the sense that, like these protests were claiming, with many of the people from deep in the Israeli establishment in different categories, including the security system, where you're saying the government has crossed a line where civil society needs to step up and confront it. Right?
I would just tell you, hiring Ben-Gvir would be one, a clear example of like a
because you're objecting to like the breaking of the law, and for me, like breaking the law. So I know we need to go, but like to me, the more important element, and maybe why it's more important is a different question, is like when it gets to that point where you go, well, like something here has gone outside of normal times, and now we're in times where things need to be different.
Well,
you don't think we've gotten to it, but I want to know what would make you think we have gotten to it, because I think we both agree that somewhere between Germany 1933 and 39,
right,
there's a point where that happens, and I want to know where that is for you.
First of all, I'll think about that as well, but I would ask, first of all, in this scenario you are presenting, right? Like someone mentioned to me where I was talking like, oh, but Israel and the war crime. And I was like, 1 second, before we get into Israel and war crimes, like, does America do war crimes? Does Russia do war crimes? Does Ukraine do war crimes? Like, what does this word even mean? So you will agree with me that unfortunately, there's breaking the law and there's breaking the law. Right? Because you could be like all sides. So you're talking about like major law breaking. Unfortunately, we have to speak in that kind of language because like, I'm assuming you're saying like, I'm not talking about like the nonsense law breaking. Right? I just want to make sure you're saying like okay. I mean, there's all like the clear cases, right? Like if they're, anything that would be like, abhorrent, and they could be like, well, you and I might disagree what we think that is. I think we're on the same page on that. And then like you're saying like, and again, I'm not answering you. I'm just thinking about this, and this is something I mentioned to you. I don't even think I got back to you on the Discord about it, like which is how much of, let's say, and maybe it's not important for you, but it's almost like I want to say I agree with 60% of what you're saying. And it could be that 60% is enough for me to like, quote unquote, be on your side politically. But it's important for me that the 40% that wasn't true is called out, that it's not true, I guess. And by that, I mean, like, there's a lot that weighs on me, which is like, but there's just not Bibi. There's media bias. There's like these lies that it muddies the water for me to be like, use those terms. So I could, and again, I'll think about it. I could probably tell you that like, when I say the right has gone too far, and I'm moving the war out of this right now, but like the right has gone too far. They've reached that point. I could argue that they were sort of pushed to that in a certain level. That doesn't excuse them. It just means like, I think like this is sort of like, they become more radicalized because they feel there's that 40% that let's say is not true. And they turn that 40% into 90%. And then like they feel the license to then start going crazy or quote unquote fight fire with fire the way they see they're being attacked. So I need to think to myself what those numbers are, but I guess that's what would be important for me. And
so just to make sure I understand you,
sure.
What you're saying to my question is that line is somewhere that has been passed, right? The civil society didn't have to rise up. But you're saying that there's something for you about this is very interesting for me, so I want to make sure, about the lack of self-reflection on that side which was rising up against it, that is what blocked you from actually acting on that. So you felt like they're
Correct.
crossing the line, but you're saying like, but look at these guys on the other side. Like I can't like strap my wagon to them. Right?
It just that's not where honesty is. It doesn't matter to me like if like they're right that I need to bring down quote unquote this dictator. That is just another problem that I'm looking at. So it's
So the problem for you was not that the line wasn't crossed. The problem for you was that you didn't see a practical avenue that you could follow to deal with that.
and yes, and just that I felt that
you would be serving the wrong master if you do that. Like you would be serving something that
not
you
really
don't believe.
not only the wrong master. I think like in order to like quote agree with them, I have to sort of swallow this bitter pill of bullshit, which like I can't take this in because like if I need to be with your camp, then I need to be like then this and this and this and this and this and this and all these things are true. Like that to me was just like antithetical to like what it is that we're trying to do over here. So like
And those are things, let's say, not about things that I said that I disagree with you, but about things that were just false and bullshitted
yes.
around.
Correct. So like, you're telling me like it's less about like the ambulance weren't stopped. Great. So like, no problem. They weren't stopped. If I said that, I'm sorry, I was wrong. No problem. It's the other elements that are true. Let's say that like those weigh on me, and I guess the attitude that the left had of like, the means, the cause justifies the means in a certain way. To me, felt like very dangerous also, which is like the second you have power, like how else is this attitude going to manifest? Are you going to be like, no, this was like our D-Day, and after that, like we're all going to play cool, or like maybe not. Maybe you'll feel like I could do more things. I could squeeze more power this way. I could. So, and I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just saying that was a big concern of
mine. Okay. I guess we can think about it till next time.
Yes, we'll talk next time. Take care. Have a great week.
You too, Hazy. Good talk. Bye.